I hadn't seen my father in nearly 6 years, and the first thing he did when I walked into the boardroom was look at me like I was a virus he thought he'd eradicated. No words, just a glare, sharp and dismissive, like I didn't belong in the room named after our family. The Monroe and Langley office hadn't changed. Still smelled like mahogany polish, expensive ink, and generational arrogance. Ivy was already seated at the long conference table, legs crossed, expression smug enough to curdle cream. Her blazer matched the leather chairs. Her heels clicked once against the floor like punctuation. Ivy always knew how to perform for power, even when there wasn't an audience. Raymond Monroe, our father, sat at the head of the table like a CEO who'd been inconvenienced by mortality. He didn't nod, didn't speak, didn't even ask if I'd made it back in one piece. Just tapped the armrest with one manicured finger like he had somewhere better to be, Miss Langley, the lawyer who'd worked for our family since before Ivy and I were born, nodded at me with a trace of humanity. She looked older, wearier, but her posture was razor straight. Thank you all for coming. Let's begin. The will opened with the usual formality. Ms. Langley's voice was calm and practiced, the kind you hear on audiobooks meant to lull you to sleep, except this one could rewrite lives. To Ivy Monroe, she began, I leave the evergreen property on Wolf Pine Lake and the vintage Jaguar XK140 from my personal collection. Ivy's smile twitched, just slightly. She probably expected more. To Raymond Monroe, Langley continued, I leave my first edition Mark Twain volumes and a $5,000 donation made in his name to the National Integrity Council. My father gave a dry laugh that barely sounded human. Fitting, he muttered. Langley didn't acknowledge it. Just flipped the page and said, and to Cassandra Monroe, my granddaughter and sole confidant, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes all financial holdings, real estate, and full voting control over Monroe's systems, effective immediately. The room dropped into silence so thick you could have folded it in half. Ivy's jaw clenched. My father's grip on the armrest froze mid-tap. Langley reached down, retrieved a thick envelope from her briefcase, and slid it across the table to me. My name was typed on the front. Inside was the certified trust document, signed and sealed. I barely had time to reach for it before Raymond lunged forward, snatched the envelope off the polished wood, tore it open, pulled out the papers, and in one furious motion, he fed them into the office shredder beside his chair. The sound of teeth-grinding paper filled the room like a scream no one could stop. Ivy gasped. Ms. Langley didn't even blink. This wasn't her first time watching men destroy fortunes out of pride. Raymond turned toward me, eyes burning. That's what you get for abandoning your family. You don't get to come back and collect a prize. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at the pile of shredded legacy and gave a small, deliberate smile. Not the kind that invites warmth. The kind that comes after you've seen the ending and realized you were the only one holding the real script. Because what he shredded wasn't what mattered. What mattered was still tucked in the lining of my coat. And they had no idea what was coming next. I didn't go home right away. After the will reading, I drove aimlessly around the city for nearly an hour, letting the hum of traffic and the sting of everything unspoken settle beneath my skin. My fingers kept brushing the inside pocket of my coat where the real envelope rested. Untouched, unread, but burning like a live wire. He'd given it to me 6 months ago, during what turned out to be our last conversation. We were sitting in a quiet corner booth at a diner just off Route 9. The pie was average, the coffee worse, but that wasn't the point. He pushed the envelope across the table wrapped in a napkin like it was contraband. Don't open this, he said, unless they try to erase you. I laughed. I thought he was being dramatic. I told him no one was going to erase me. I was a former naval intelligence officer, not a ghost in a spy novel. But he didn't smile. He just nodded slowly and said, Then I trust you'll know when it's time. Now I did. Back in my apartment, I locked the door, pulled the blinds, and placed the envelope gently on the kitchen table like it was something sacred. The seal was thick red wax, his signature style. I broke it with the edge of my thumbnail. Inside, a notarized trust transfer form, dated and certified. My name. My grandfather's signature. A complete legal shift of all remaining assets. The shredded document at the office was real, but it had been a copy, a decoy. The actual transfer had happened quietly, legally, weeks before he died. I exhaled slowly. There was also a USB drive taped to the back of the paper. I plugged it into my laptop. One folder, labeled simply Legacy. Inside, digital scans of corporate ownership documents, bank statements, asset control, and an outline of a secondary holding, something called Project Aurora, registered under Monroe Systems' Humanitarian Division. I'd never even heard of it. And a video. I clicked play. My grandfather appeared on the screen, sitting in the solarium of his Charleston estate. The sunlight poured in behind him like a halo. He looked tired but calm. His voice was steady. "If you're watching this, Cass," he began, "then it means they did what I feared they would." He looked straight into the camera. "I've watched them discredit your service, dismiss your silence, and turn your absence into justification for erasure. I didn't stop it when I should have. But I can finish it now. The papers you hold aren't for negotiation. They are the blueprint for everything I'm leaving behind. You were the only one who ever told me the truth. Now I'm giving you the truth back." The screen went black. No signature, no goodbye, just silence. I sat there at the table, alone, but not empty, because now I knew what they tried to do, and exactly how I was going to undo it. The next morning, I was at the county records office by 8 a.m. I didn't bring the video. I didn't bring the trust documents. All I brought was my ID and a polite smile. The clerk took my license, typed for a few seconds, then frowned. "You're not in the system." "What do you mean?" She double-checked the screen. This record was closed, marked as deceased. My stomach dropped. "That's a mistake. Not according to this. Certified 2 weeks ago by a court order." I didn't argue, just nodded and left, heart hammering, mind racing. Someone had legally declared me dead. And not just in some forgotten spreadsheet, in the courts. By noon, I was at Sasha Lynn's office. She hadn't changed much since Annapolis. Still blunt, still unshakable, still drinking gas station coffee like it was an act of rebellion. "I need help," I said simply. She didn't ask why, just opened her laptop. "Tell me everything." I handed her the documents. The trust, the fake death record, the USB with the files. She read in silence, flipping through page after page like a surgeon examining an X-ray for rot. "They filed this in a state court," she muttered, "under emergency restructuring. Used a physician's statement to justify mental instability. Signed off by a judge." "Which judge?" She looked up. "Sealed." I sat back. Sasha narrowed her eyes. "You know who set this up?" "My father. Maybe Ivy, maybe both." She closed the folder slowly. "This wasn't just to cut you out. This was to erase you. Clean. Permanent." I nodded. They didn't think I'd come back. "Or if you did, it'd be too late." Her expression hardened. "We'll make it not too late." By late afternoon, I was sitting in my apartment with every piece of mail, record, and scrap of paper I'd saved since returning from service. Somewhere in there was the thread I needed. And I found it, buried in a deployment binder from 2 years ago. A medical record with my full legal name and social security number, signed by a Navy psychiatrist, certifying me as mentally fit for intelligence fieldwork. Dated just 4 months before the supposed mental breakdown my father claimed. I brought it back to Sasha. Her eyes lit up like a match. "This contradicts everything in the court filing," she said. "They submitted a physician's letter from someone named Elise Garnett. Ever heard of her?" "No." "She works out of a boutique elder care practice in Mercer Island, mostly does estate reports for wealthy clients." I stood up. "You going to her?" she asked. I nodded. If she put her name on something that false, I want to hear her say it. Sasha didn't try to stop me. She just said, "Be careful. Anyone willing to sign off on a living person's death might not be doing it for free." I drove out just before sunset. The office was a colonial-style house with white shutters and a brass sign that gleamed in the dusk. I rang the bell. No answer. I waited. At exactly 6:12 p.m., a silver Volvo pulled into the drive. Dr. Elise Garnett stepped out, groceries in hand. She saw me, froze, and the blood drained from her face. "Dr. Garnett," I said quietly, "we need to talk." And from the way she dropped the bag, I knew. She already knew what I was there for. She invited me inside eventually. Not because she wanted to, but because she understood what was coming if she didn't. The house was staged like a magazine ad. Soft jazz playing low. A vase of white lilies on the coffee table. Everything perfect, except for the tremor in her hands as she poured 2 glasses of water. "I never thought I'd see you in person," she said finally. "That makes one of us," I replied, my voice calm but pointed. I pulled the printed declaration from my coat and laid it on the table between us. "This says I'm dead." She wouldn't look at it. "I signed what your father gave me. He said you'd agreed to step away from everything, that you were unstable, suffering from identity delusions. You believed that?" Her mouth twitched. "He said it was temporary, a formality, that it was to keep the company from being caught in scandal. He said, it was what you wanted." I was in active federal service when this was signed, with verified clearance and no history of mental illness. She looked like she might cry, but didn't. Just folded her hands together as if in prayer. I didn't know they would file it in court. I thought it was internal. A private precaution. That's not how legal death works. I realize that now. I stood up, but before I left, I said one more thing. "If you're ever subpoenaed, I suggest you tell the truth. And this time, all of it." She didn't follow me to the door. Back in my apartment, the weight of it all began to crystallize into something sharper. Not just betrayal, premeditated erasure. I pulled out the USB again and opened the folder labeled Legacy. There was one subfolder I hadn't clicked yet. Project Aurora inside were documents detailing a subsidiary humanitarian tech initiative my grandfather had built off-grid from Monroe Systems, focused on veterans reintegration, trauma-informed AI, and civilian military transition tools. Buried within the folder was a second address. Vault H33, Eastern Oregon. Entry by biometric scan only. Authorized, Cassandra Monroe. That night, I packed a go bag, slipped the original documents and USB into a fireproof case, and drove for 6 hours straight into the pine-coated quiet of the Oregon wilderness. Vault H33 didn't look like a vault. It looked like an abandoned government weather station. Faded siding, a rusted keypad, and a blinking red sensor above the door. I placed my palm on the scanner. Green light. Door clicked open. Inside, silence, cold, and the buzz of electric locks unlocking as I stepped deeper into the corridor. I found a black steel case bolted to a slab, engraved on top, "For Cassandra. They'll never find this one." Inside the case, hard copies of corporate transfers, stock ledgers, ownership rights for Monroe Systems, and a flash drive encased in red resin with one label etched on the top. Failsafe, I took it, sealed the case again, and walked out as the vault door closed behind me with a final, echoing thud. Back in the car, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. Because now I didn't just have documents, I had the blueprint for everything they tried to burn, and I was going to use it. By the time I made it back to Seattle, I had already decided this wasn't going to be a private fight. Raymond thought silence was protection, that if no one talked about it, it didn't happen. But I had learned long ago that silence was just another weapon, and I was done being disarmed. I sent the files from Vault H33 to one person I trusted outside my circle, Dean Keller, a former Navy journalist, turned independent investigative reporter. We hadn't spoken in 5 years, but he picked up on the first ring. "Cass?" he asked, voice tight with disbelief. I know what they said," I interrupted, "but I'm alive. And I have everything." The next day, the first article dropped. Declared dead heiress to Monroe Systems fights back after inheritance erasure. The story spread like wildfire. First veteran forums, then business blogs, then mainstream press. By noon, Ivy had scrubbed her socials. Raymond issued a carefully worded statement. "We are heartbroken over recent misinformation. Cassandra has been struggling with re-entry into civilian life. The family has always acted in her best interest. He didn't mention the fake death certificate, or the forged signatures, or the corporate transfers filed through a shell trust registered to his personal real estate firm. He thought playing the "she's unstable" card would work. He didn't know I still had the field clearance to shut down a drone network in 30 seconds. They dug up my old service records. Pulled out an incident from Afghanistan, one where I refused to authorize a targeted strike. There had been civilians in the blast radius. I stood down. My CO tried to bury it, but the inquiry cleared me. Now they used it as proof I was emotionally reactive. They painted me as fragile, and I let them, for about 12 hours. Then I released the video from Vault H33. It was simple. No music, no edits. Just my grandfather, sitting in the same chair, his voice calm and steady. If you're watching this, then Raymond did what I always feared he would. He doesn't see people. He sees leverage. He doesn't build. He burns. That's why everything I own, everything I built, belongs to Cassandra now. Not because of blood, but because of principle. That clip went viral within an hour. By dinner, Monroe Systems stock dropped 6%. Shareholders demanded emergency meetings. Veteran groups issued statements of support. And Raymond? He went on air again, this time with a forced smile and glassy eyes. "This is a family matter," he said, "and I hope the public will respect our privacy." But the mask slipped. When asked about the forged documents, he snapped, "She was gone. Someone had to lead." And just like that, he confirmed everything. I stood in my living room watching the footage on my laptop, the screen lighting my face in the dark. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about truth, about showing the world that erasure leaves fingerprints, and I was tracing every single one of them. Sasha didn't waste time. She assembled everything. Witness statements, the video from Vault H33, the real trust transfer, screenshots of bank transactions, and a digital trail so tight it could suffocate a defense team in court. "You've got them," she said, flipping through the folder like she was dealing blackjack at a federal indictment. "But we're not filing civil. We go criminal." I nodded. "We need one more piece," she added. "Someone to authenticate the forgery in court. You said the signature was lifted?" "Yes. From my discharge packet, probably." She picked up her phone. "Then we bring in LeClaire." Miles LeClaire looked like he hadn't blinked in 20 years. Former FBI, now running private forensic analysis. We met him at a quiet office space above a tax prep shop in Westlake. The windows were blacked out, the walls lined with document scanners and magnifiers. He didn't say much, just laid my military records next to the forged corporate transfer and pulled up pressure overlays on his screen. Side by side, stroke by stroke. "You see this?" he said finally, pointing to the top curve of the C in Cassandra. "Real one has a trailing feather. This one's flat, no velocity. That means someone scanned, traced, or copied, but they didn't write it. Can you prove it in court?" He didn't even look at me. "In under 10 minutes. Sasha was already drafting the affidavit when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought it was just paperwork. Ivy." I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Sasha. "Useful?" I asked. She smiled. "Immensely." We filed the emergency injunction 2 days later, freezing all movement of Monroe Systems assets, requesting full court review of the trust, and attaching criminal fraud as the legal basis for suppression of identity. Ivy was served at a gala downtown. Raymond got his notice at the club where he played racquetball 3 times a week like it was a religion. He tried to call me. I didn't answer. Instead, I recorded a message for the board. In it, I laid out the truth. The forged documents, the false declaration of death, the digital theft. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask for sympathy. I simply said, "You trusted a man who built an empire by eliminating anyone who didn't mirror him. My grandfather built something meant to outlast ego. I'm here to honor that, not exploit it." I sent it directly to the executive board, and by morning, 3 members had resigned. But it wasn't just about the company. It was about erasure. About what it meant to legally no longer exist. about having your name filed into the void by people who used to tuck you in at night. Raymond didn't see me as family. He saw me as a threat to control. And control was the one thing he didn't know how to lose quietly. Sasha looked at the court date on the calendar. 7 days. That's your shot. I want it clean, I said. No scandal, just fact. You don't need fire, Cassandra, she said. You've already got something better. What's that? She closed the folder with finality. Proof. The courthouse smelled like bleach and old paper. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in full navy blues. Not for them, for me. For the part of me they tried to bury, along with my name. Sasha stood beside me in a sharp charcoal suit, her expression unreadable. Miles sat behind us, laptop in hand, forensic files cued and glowing on his screen. Raymond walked in late. Custom navy suit, pocket square too crisp, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they'd been pulled straight from a corporate catalog. Ivy trailed behind him, head down, eyes glassy, as if she already knew how this would go, but hadn't found the grace to admit it. Judge Maya Kernan presided. Known for her intolerance for theatrics and her love for straight lines, Sasha once called her a scalpel with a gavel. Perfect. Case number 47A, Monroe versus Monroe, the bailiff announced. Sasha stood, calm and clear. Your Honor, we are here to challenge the fraudulent legal declaration of death, the suppression of legal identity, and the unauthorized transfer of corporate control and assets belonging to Cassandra Monroe. Raymond's lawyer, a silver-haired man named Barrett Roth, stood with an exaggerated sigh. Your Honor, this is a tragic family misunderstanding dressed up in courtroom drama. My client acted in what he believed were the best interests of both his daughter and the corporation. Judge Kernan raised an eyebrow. By filing her as deceased? Barrett straightened. There was documentation provided, a physician's letter, evidence of Cassandra's mental decline. At the time, Kernan cut him off with a single raised hand. Ms. Lynn? Sasha nodded. If I may, Your Honor, there's a video. Kernan gave a simple wave. Play it. Miles tapped his laptop. The lights dimmed. The monitor flickered. There he was, my grandfather, sitting in his sunroom, sunlight warming his weathered face. If they're watching this, he said, then they did what I feared. They tried to erase Cassandra, but they can't. Because she is the only one I trusted. Not just with the money, with the future. The room was so quiet you could hear the projectors hum. Judge Kernan leaned back, hands folded. Anything to say to that, Mr. Roth? Barrett stood, flustered. It's emotional, not legal. Sentimental testimony doesn't override a state law. Sasha stepped forward. Then let's go legal. She handed a binder to the clerk, who brought it to the bench. Inside, authenticated military records, original trust transfer documents, a sworn affidavit from the doctor misled into signing Cassandra's death certificate, and forensic proof of a forged signature used in multiple asset transfers. The judge flipped through it for a full 30 seconds. Raymond's jaw was clenched tight. Ivy looked like she might be sick. Finally, Judge Kernan spoke. This court finds the evidence credible and substantial. Ms. Monroe is hereby legally reinstated as living, as the rightful heir to the Monroe estate, and as the sole controlling stakeholder of Monroe Systems. Raymond opened his mouth, but the judge held up one finger. All actions made under fraudulent authority are suspended. This court will refer the matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal proceedings. The gavel hit once. Sharp. Final. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood still, spine straight, boots grounded, because I hadn't come for revenge. I'd come to be seen, and I finally was. I didn't go to the press conference. They waited outside the courthouse, cameras ready, questions flying through the wind. I walked right past them. No soundbite, no headline, no grand statement. Just my boots on cold stone and the weight of a name they couldn't rewrite anymore. Instead, I took the long route across town, past the old shipping yards, past the graffiti-covered walls I used to trace with my fingers when I couldn't afford to dream bigger. I stopped at the corner of 11th and Bay Ridge. The building was small, forgotten, wedged between a shuttered tailor shop and a pharmacy with flickering signage. But it was mine. The deed, signed and sealed, was still warm from the clerk's stamp. My name, printed in bold, Cassandra Monroe. Owner, founder, no one else. Inside, it still smelled like dust and old paper. But there was potential in the walls, something that felt like breath waiting to be drawn. I stood in the middle of the floor, turned in a slow circle, and then knelt. From my coat, I pulled the last envelope. The one marked in my grandfather's handwriting, "Begin here." Inside was a folded sketch of the space, renovation plans, wiring outlines, and in bold, slanted letters across the bottom, "Build what you never had." So I did. I filed the LLC paperwork the next day. Signal House was born, part tech lab, part transitional center, a place for veterans like me who'd come home to find themselves erased by silence, a place where no one had to prove they were worthy of surviving. I called Dean Keller to write the launch piece. I called Sasha to join the board. Miles offered to secure the digital framework. No charge. "I don't like systems that try to bury people," he said. Within 3 weeks, the first grant was approved. Within 6, we were accepting our first applicants. Women like First Lieutenant Naomi Estrada, dishonorably discharged for reporting harassment. Staff Sergeant Lila Keene, homeless for months after the VA denied her housing support. I sat with each of them. I listened. I handed them pens and paperwork and plans, not platitudes. Because I knew the difference between sympathy and structure, one afternoon, I passed Ivy on the street near Pioneer Square. She saw me, paused, didn't speak. Good. I didn't need her apology. Didn't want it. Forgiveness wasn't the point. Survival was. Purpose was. Peace. That night, I unlocked the studio for our first support group. No ribbon cutting, no media. Just 6 women. One circle of folding chairs and a coffee pot someone had donated from a church basement. I looked around, and for the first time in years, I felt still. I wasn't a daughter they could erase. I wasn't a shadow in their narrative. I was proof. Living, breathing, unshreddable proof that you can rise from the ashes without becoming fire yourself. They tried to write me out of the story, so I built a whole new one. And this time, I held the pen.